I lived in a beautiful colonial house on Maple Street for 47 years, the kind of home where every creaking floorboard held a memory and every room whispered stories of the life I'd built. My husband passed 11 years ago, leaving me alone in those two quiet rooms with nothing but photographs and the weekly visits from my son's family to break up the endless sameness of my days. I was 73 years old, a widow with arthritis in my hands, and a heart that still ached for the man who used to hold them. My son told me I was getting forgetful. My daughter-in-law said I was becoming a burden. And maybe they were right, because when they suggested I sign some papers to make things easier, to help them help me, I believed them. I trusted them completely. I had no idea that the very people I'd raised, the family I'd sacrificed everything for, were systematically planning to steal my home, drain my accounts, and lock me away in a facility where I'd die forgotten and alone. But my 6-year-old granddaughter knew something was wrong. And the cheap plastic toy I bought her at a dollar store, the one I thought was just another forgotten trinket, would become the only thing standing between me and complete destruction. If you haven't already subscribed to this channel, please hit that subscribe button now. And to get the conversation going, please leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Thank you so much. Now let's get back to the story. That morning started like every other since my husband died. I woke at 6:30 to an empty house that felt too large for one person, made myself weak tea because my hands shook too much for anything requiring precision, and shuffled to the living room where the television kept me company with its cheerful lies about the world being a good place. The November cold seeped through the old windows no matter how high I turned the thermostat, and I wrapped myself in the afghan my mother crocheted 60 years ago, back when people still made things to last, back when family meant something other than obligation and resentment. My son was supposed to visit that afternoon. He came every Wednesday like clockwork, always with his wife, always with little Emma skipping ahead of them with her bright smile that reminded me so much of my own daughter before life taught her to calculate the worth of every interaction. I looked forward to these visits with a desperation that embarrassed me. An old woman shouldn't need her family's attention so badly that she counts the hours between their appearances. But loneliness does strange things to pride. I'd spent the morning cleaning, even though the house was already spotless, because I wanted them to see I was still capable, still managing, still deserving of staying in my own home. They arrived at 2 o'clock. I heard the car in the driveway and rushed to the door with more energy than I'd felt in weeks, my heart doing that pathetic flutter it always did. When I knew I'd have company, when I knew the silence would be broken for a few hours, Emma burst through the door first, all flying hair and excited chatter about her day at school, about a drawing she'd made, about a friend who'd shared cookies at lunch. She hugged my legs, the way children do before they learn that affection can be weaponized, before they understand that love can be conditional. My son followed, tall and serious in his business suit, already checking his phone before he'd properly entered the house. His wife came last, perfectly dressed as always, her smile the practice kind that never quite reaches the eyes, the kind I'd seen on salespeople and lawyers, and anyone else who needed you to trust them long enough to get what they wanted. "Hi, Mom," my son said, kissing my cheek with the perfunctory affection of routine. "How are you feeling today?" "Oh, I'm fine, dear. Just fine. I made cookies. Emma's favorites, the chocolate chip ones with the walnuts." "That's nice, Mom, but we talked about you using the oven. Remember? We worry about you forgetting and leaving it on." I didn't remember forgetting, but I'd learned not to argue. Every protest was treated as further evidence of my declining faculties. Every insistence that I was fine, met with patronizing explanations about how I didn't realize how bad things had gotten. My daughter-in-law was already walking through the house with her critical eye, noting dust that didn't exist, clucking her tongue at imaginary disorder, building her case for why I couldn't be trusted to live independently. I'd seen her do this before, but I'd always assumed it was just her particular brand of helpfulness, the way some people show love through criticism and management. I didn't realize she was documenting evidence. I didn't know that every scattered magazine, every unwashed dish in the sink, every moment of confusion was being cataloged and weaponized for a purpose I couldn't yet imagine. Emma, sweetie, why don't you go play in the backyard for a bit? My daughter-in-law said, her voice honey sweet the way it always was when she wanted the child out of earshot. Grandma and Daddy and I need to talk about grown-up things. But I want to stay with Grandma, Emma protested, clutching my hand with surprising strength. Children have instincts about these things, senses that haven't been dulled by years of polite social lies. She knew something was wrong, even if she couldn't articulate what. Go on, honey, I said, squeezing her hand. I'll come find you in a few minutes and we can have cookies together. She left reluctantly, looking back over her shoulder with worried eyes that broke something in my chest. The three of us settled in the living room, them on the couch like visiting dignitaries, me in my worn recliner that had molded itself to my body over decades of use. My son pulled papers from his briefcase with the efficient movements of someone who'd rehearsed this moment, who'd planned every word and gesture for maximum effect. The papers were thick, official-looking, covered in the kind of dense legal language designed to intimidate people into signing without reading. Mom, we need to talk about your situation here, he began, and I felt my stomach drop because nothing good ever followed that phrase. We're worried about you. You're getting older, and this house is too much for you to handle alone. I'm managing just fine, I said, but my voice came out weaker than I intended, threaded with the doubt they'd been carefully cultivating over months of small comments and concerned looks. Are you, though? My daughter-in-law interjected, her tone dripping with false sympathy. Last week you told us you couldn't remember if you'd taken your medication. 2 weeks before that, you left the stove on for 3 hours. You're forgetting things and it's not safe. I wanted to argue that I'd remembered the medication eventually, that the stove had been on low and nothing had burned, but the words died in my throat. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was losing my grip on things. The uncertainty was its own kind of prison, more effective than any lock or chain. We think it's time to consider other options, my son continued, laying out the papers on the coffee table like a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. Assisted living. Somewhere with staff who can check on you, make sure you're taking care of yourself properly. Somewhere you won't have to worry about maintaining this big house. But this is my home, I whispered, looking around at the walls that held my entire history, at the spot where my daughter took her first steps, at the kitchen where I'd cooked 10,000 meals, at the bedroom where my husband died holding my hand. I don't want to leave. We know it's hard, Mom, but we have to think about what's best for you. And to make this transition easier, we need you to sign some papers. Just formalities, really. Power of attorney so we can handle your finances and medical decisions. Make sure all your bills are paid. Coordinate your care. And we'll need to sell the house to pay for the facility. The market's good right now, and this place should sell quickly. My hands started shaking, but not from arthritis this time. Something felt wrong about this, something in the way they were both watching me so intently, in the way they'd brought these papers already prepared, in the way this felt less like a concerned family discussion and more like an ambush. But what did I know? I was old, forgetful, a burden. They'd told me so enough times that I'd started to believe it. My son pushed the papers closer, placed a pen in my trembling hand. I looked down at the dense text, at words like irrevocable and conservatorship and full authority, and I felt the room starting to spin. I don't understand all this legal language, but I said, my voice small and defeated. Can we take some time? Maybe I should have a lawyer look at it? Mom, we are trying to help you. Why would you need a lawyer? Do you not trust us? My son's voice had an edge now, a sharpness that made me flinch. This is exactly what we're talking about. You're getting paranoid, seeing problems where there aren't any. That's part of the decline. I'm not paranoid. I just want to understand what I'm signing. You're signing papers that let us take care of you, my daughter-in-law said, her patience clearly wearing thin. Papers that any responsible elderly person signs when they can't manage on their own anymore. Unless you want to end up like Mrs. Henderson down the street, falling and lying on the floor for 2 days before anyone finds you. The image was deliberately cruel, designed to terrify me into compliance. And it worked. I picked up the pen, my hand shaking so badly the signature would barely be legible, and I was about to sign away everything I had, everything I was, when Emma's voice cut through the fog of my fear. Grandma, Grandma, come see what I found in the garden. My daughter-in-law's jaw clenched. Emma, we said not now. Grandma's busy. But it's important. Please, Grandma. I set down the pen, grateful for any excuse to delay the moment that felt increasingly like signing my own death warrant. Let me just see what she wants. I'll be right back. I stood on legs that felt like water, using the arms of the chair to push myself up, feeling every one of my 73 years in my aching joints and tired bones. Emma was at the back door, bouncing with the impatient energy of childhood, her face flushed with excitement about whatever she'd discovered. I followed her into the backyard, into the weak November sunlight that did nothing to warm the cold that had settled deep in my bones. She led me to the garden where I used to grow tomatoes and herbs before my hands got too stiff for that kind of detailed work, and she pointed at a hole she'd dug near the fence. Look, I found treasure. Can I keep it? It wasn't treasure, it was an old metal box I'd buried there decades ago, a time capsule of sorts, containing photographs and letters from when my children were young, mementos I'd saved from their childhoods that they'd long since stopped caring about. The box was rusted, barely recognizable, and seeing it unearthed felt like watching my past literally dug up and exposed. But Emma's joy was so pure, so untainted by the mercenary calculations happening inside the house, that I couldn't help but smile. Of course you can keep it, sweetheart. But let's look inside together, okay? We sat on the cold ground, Emma's small, warm body pressed against my side, and we opened the corroded box together. Inside were photographs of my son as a baby, as a toddler, as a gap-toothed kindergartner who'd once told me I was the best mommy in the whole world. There were cards he'd made me for birthdays and Mother's Days, construction paper and crayon declarations of love from a child who'd believed those words with his whole heart. There were report cards with teacher comments about what a kind, thoughtful boy he was, about how he always helped the other students, about his big heart and generous spirit. Looking at those artifacts of who he used to be, I realized with crushing clarity that the man inside my house, planning to steal my home and my freedom, was a stranger wearing my son's face. That little boy, who'd promised to always take care of me, had died somewhere along the way, replaced by someone who saw his mother as an obstacle, an asset to be liquidated, a problem to be solved. Is that Daddy? Emma asked, pointing at a photograph of my son at her age, grinning with chocolate ice cream smeared across his face. Yes, baby, that's your daddy when he was little, just like you. He looks happy. He doesn't look happy anymore. The observation was devastating in its simplicity. Children see things adults have trained themselves to ignore. Emma had noticed what I'd been trying to pretend wasn't true, that my son had become hard somewhere along the way, that the softness had been scraped out of him by ambition or disappointment or whatever alchemy turns loving children into calculating adults. We sat there in the cold garden, 2 generations looking at the ghost of the one between us, and I felt something shift inside me. Not resignation, not defeat, something harder, colder, more determined. Emma, sweetheart, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully, okay? She nodded, her eyes wide and serious in that way children get when they know something important is happening. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. Sometimes they forget what's important. And sometimes they do things that hurt people they're supposed to love. If that ever happens, if you ever feel like something's wrong, I want you to tell someone, a teacher or a friend's parent, or another grown-up you trust. Can you promise me that? Is something wrong now, Grandma? I looked back at the house, at the windows where I could see my son and his wife waiting impatiently for me to return and sign away my life. I thought about the papers on the coffee table, about the assisted living facility they'd probably already selected, about the for sale sign they'd plant in my yard before I'd even packed a box. I thought about spending my remaining years in a sterile room with strangers, watching my mind fade while my family spent the money from my house on vacations and cars and all the things they wanted more than they wanted me. Yes, Emma, something's very wrong. What are you going to do? It was a good question. What could a 73-year-old woman with shaking hands and a forgetful mind do against her own family, against legal documents and medical evaluations, and a system designed to shuffle inconvenient elderly people out of sight. I didn't have money for lawyers. I didn't have anyone to call for help. I had only this house that they wanted to take and a 6-year-old granddaughter looking at me with absolute faith that I'd somehow make things right. But I'd survived 73 years on this planet. I'd buried a husband, raised children, weathered losses that should have broken me. I was forgetful, yes. Weak, maybe, but not stupid. Not yet, and not defeated. I'm going to be smart about this, I told her, and you're going to help me. How? I looked down at the box of memories, at the evidence of who my son used to be, and an idea began forming. A desperate, unlikely idea, but the only one I had. Do you remember that toy you wanted last week at the store? The one with the button that records your voice? Emma's face lit up. She'd been begging for one of those cheap talking dolls, the kind you could record messages into and play back. I'd thought it was frivolous, a waste of money on something she'd forget about in a week. Now I realized it might be the only weapon I had. Yes, the princess one that talks. Can I have it? We're going to buy it today, but it's going to be our special secret, okay? And I need you to do exactly what I tell you with it. Can you do that for Grandma? She nodded solemnly, sensing the weight of what I was asking, even if she couldn't fully understand why. We went back inside, Emma carrying her treasure box, me carrying a cold knot of determination in my chest. My son looked up impatiently when we entered, the papers still spread on the table, the pen lying in wait like a coiled snake. Finally, Mom, we really need to finish this. I have to get back to the office. Actually, I need to run to the store, I said, my voice steadier than it had been before, strengthened by the plan taking shape in my mind. I promised Emma we'd get her that toy she's been wanting. We won't be long. Mom, this is more important than a toy. You can take her to the store later. Right now, we need your signature. And you'll have it. After we go to the store. Emma's been so patient, and I promised. Surely you can wait 30 minutes. I could see the war happening on his face, the irritation battling with the need to keep me compliant, to avoid pushing so hard I'd start asking the questions they didn't want to answer. My daughter-in-law looked like she wanted to argue, but my son put a hand on her arm, a silent signal to let it go. They thought they had all the time in the world. They thought I was a confused old woman who'd sign whatever they put in front of me eventually. They had no idea that the clock had just started ticking on their plan, or that I was about to start fighting back. Fine, 30 minutes, but then we're doing this, Mom. No more delays. I took Emma's hand and walked out of my house with more purpose than I'd felt in years. We drove to the dollar store 3 blocks away, the kind of place I usually avoided because it reminded me too much of how far I'd fallen from the days when I could afford nice things, when my husband was alive and money wasn't something I had to count and ration and worry about constantly. But today, the dollar store felt like an armory, and that cheap $3 talking doll felt like a sword. The doll was pink and plastic, with a button on its back and a speaker in its chest. The packaging promised it could record up to 30 seconds of audio. 30 seconds to save my life, to preserve my freedom, to catch my family in their own trap. We bought it with the crumpled bills from my purse, money I'd been saving for groceries, and drove back home with Emma clutching the package like it was made of gold. In the driveway, before we went back inside, I opened the package and showed Emma how the recording function worked. Remember what I told you in the garden? About telling someone if something's wrong? I need you to keep this doll with you when we go back inside. Keep it hidden under your sweater. And when Daddy and your mom start talking to me about those papers again, I need you to press this button without them seeing. Can you do that? Like a spy? Exactly like a spy. The doll is going to remember everything they say, so if I forget or if I need to show someone what happened, I'll have proof. But you can't tell anyone about it. Not Daddy, not your mom. Nobody. It's our secret mission. Understand? She nodded with the seriousness of a child entrusted with something important by someone she loved. We went back inside, Emma with the doll hidden under her coat, me with my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my ribs. My son was pacing in the living room, checking his watch with exaggerated impatience. My daughter-in-law had helped herself to my kitchen, and I could hear her opening cabinets, probably looking for more evidence of my supposed incompetence. Okay, we're back. Emma, honey, why don't you play with your new toy over in the corner while Grandma finishes talking with Daddy? Emma scurried to the corner of the living room, settling on the floor with her back to us, the doll cradled in her lap where she could reach the recording button. I sat back down in my recliner, my hands folded in my lap to hide their shaking, and looked at the papers that would strip away everything I'd worked my entire life to build. My son sat forward on the couch, his salesman smile firmly in place, ready to close the deal he thought was already won. Now, Mom, let's go through this one more time so you understand exactly what you're signing. This first document is the power of attorney. It gives me complete authority to make financial decisions on your behalf, pay your bills, access your accounts, sell property, manage your assets, everything. Complete authority? But what if I want to make my own decisions about something? Mom, that's the whole point. You're not capable of making those decisions anymore. That's why we're doing this. Once you sign, I'll handle everything, and you won't have to worry about any of it. And I can't change my mind later? If I feel better, if I want to manage things myself again. It's irrevocable, Mom. That means permanent. But trust me, you're not going to feel better. These conditions only get worse, and it's better to plan ahead while you still understand what's happening. The casual cruelty of his words hit me like a slap. My own son, telling me I was only going to decline, that my future was nothing but deterioration and decay, that I should surrender now while I was still coherent enough to sign away my rights. I glanced over at Emma, saw her small hand pressed against the doll's back, recording every word. I needed more. I needed him to say the parts they'd been carefully avoiding, the truth hiding behind their concern and their legal documents. And the house? You said something about selling it. Yes, this second document authorizes me to list and sell this property. The money will go into a trust that I'll manage for your care. The facility we've selected is very nice, but it's not cheap. The house should sell for around $400,000 in this market, which will cover your costs for quite a while. What if there's money left over after I'm gone? My daughter-in-law's head snapped around from the kitchen where she'd been pretending not to listen. She and my son exchanged a look, one of those married couple telepathic communications that said more than words. I saw the truth in that look, saw the calculation, saw exactly why they were so eager to have me declared incompetent and locked away. Any remaining assets would go to your heirs according to your will, my son said carefully. But let's not talk about that right now. Let's focus on getting you the care you need. But my will leaves everything to you anyway, so really, you'd get whatever's left. And if you're managing the money, you'd also be the one deciding how much of it gets spent on my care versus how much gets saved for after I die. The silence in the room was deafening. I'd said the quiet part out loud, the truth they'd been dancing around with their concerned faces and gentle voices. My son's expression hardened, and for a moment I saw something ugly underneath his mask of filial devotion. I don't appreciate what you're implying, Mom. We're trying to help you, and you're acting like we're the enemy. This is exactly the kind of paranoid thinking that proves you need professional care. I'm not paranoid. I'm just trying to understand. You want me to give you complete control of my money, sell my house, and move into a facility where I'll have no independence and no say in my own life. And I'm supposed to trust that this is all for my benefit, even though you'd profit significantly from keeping my costs low and preserving as much of the inheritance as possible. That's it, my daughter-in-law snapped, storming back into the living room. She's doing this on purpose. She's trying to make us look like the bad guys when all we want is to keep her safe. Maybe she's more gone than we thought. Maybe we need to pursue guardianship instead of power of attorney. Have her evaluated, get a judge to declare her incompetent. Is that a threat? I asked, my voice quiet but steady. If I don't sign willingly, you'll have me declared mentally unfit. It's not a threat, Mom. It's reality. You're clearly not thinking straight if you believe we're doing this for money instead of concern. We can do this the easy way, with your cooperation, or the hard way through the courts. But either way, this is happening. You can't live here alone anymore, and you can't manage your own affairs. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be. I see, so my choices are to surrender now or to fight you and lose anyway. Don't be dramatic. These aren't attacks, they're protections, legal safeguards to make sure you're taken care of properly. But if you're going to be difficult about it, then yes, we'll do what's necessary to ensure you get the care you need, even if you don't want it. Emma had stopped pretending to play with the doll. She was sitting frozen in the corner, her face pale, her eyes wide with the dawning realization that the adults she trusted were saying terrible things to the grandmother she loved. I wanted to comfort her, to shield her from this ugliness, but I needed the recording more. I needed every word of their manipulation and threats and thinly veiled greed captured on that $3 toy that was the only hope I had of stopping them. What if I refuse? What if I tell you to leave and never come back? My son laughed, but there was no humor in it. Then we call Adult Protective Services. We tell them you're a vulnerable elderly woman living in unsafe conditions, refusing necessary medical care, exhibiting signs of dementia and paranoia. They'll investigate, and when they see the state of this house, when they talk to you and hear you making wild accusations about your own family, they'll agree you need intervention. We'll get emergency guardianship within a week, and you'll be in a facility before the month is out. So, really, Mom, you're choosing between doing this with dignity on your own terms or having it forced on you by the state. Which do you prefer? The trap was perfect. They'd thought of everything, covered every escape route, built a cage around me so carefully that I hadn't even noticed the bars closing in until it was almost too late. If I signed, they'd take everything willingly. If I refused, they'd take it by force. I was an old woman with no money for lawyers, no family besides them, no resources to fight back. They held all the cards, or so they thought. But they'd forgotten about Emma, still sitting quietly in the corner with her cheap plastic doll, recording every threat and admission and mask slip they'd just handed her. They'd forgotten that their own daughter had ears and a conscience and enough love for her grandmother to disobey them when it mattered, and they'd forgotten that I hadn't survived 73 years by being weak, only by being smart enough to look weak when I needed to be underestimated. I need to use the bathroom, I said, standing up on shaking legs that weren't entirely feigned. And then I need to think about this. You're asking me to make enormous decisions, and I need a moment. You've had plenty of moments, my daughter-in-law said sharply. We've been patient, but our patience is running out. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. I walked to the bathroom on unsteady legs, closed the door behind me, and sat on the closed toilet lid with my face in my hands. My breath came in shallow gasps, panic threatening to overwhelm the fragile control I'd been maintaining. I was terrified, not of dying. I was old enough that death no longer frightened me the way it frightens the young. I was terrified of living, of spending my final years trapped in a facility where nurses would control when I ate and slept and bathed, where I'd share a room with strangers and watch television in a common area and wait for visits that would come less and less frequently until I was forgotten entirely. I was terrified of losing my home, my independence, my dignity. I was terrified of becoming the inconvenient burden my family already believed me to be. But I had the recording now. I had evidence. I just needed to figure out what to do with it. How to use this one weapon against an enemy with so many advantages. I needed help. But from whom? I had no friends close enough to burden with this, no family besides the ones trying to destroy me. I had only Emma, a 6-year-old child who shouldn't have to carry this weight, and I had myself, an old woman who'd spent too long accepting what others told her about her own incompetence. Maybe it was time to stop accepting. I splashed cold water on my face, looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The face looking back was old, tired, frightened, but it wasn't defeated, not yet. I dried my hands, squared my shoulders, and opened the bathroom door to find my daughter-in-law standing right outside, blocking my path. "We're done waiting," she said coldly. "You're going to sign those papers now, or we're calling APS. Your choice." I looked past her to where my son was dialing something on his phone, probably the Adult Protective Services number, ready to make good on his threat. Emma was still in the corner, the doll now clutched openly against her chest, tears running down her face as she watched her parents bully her grandmother. The sight of her crying broke something open in my chest, some reserve of strength I didn't know I still possessed. I'd spent months letting them convince me I was helpless, incompetent, a burden. I'd internalized their lies and their gaslighting until I'd almost believed that signing away my life was the responsible thing to do. But looking at Emma's tear-stained face, I realized that surrender wasn't just about me. It was teaching my granddaughter that women fold when pressured, that family loyalty only flows one direction, that power wins and love loses. If I gave up now, I'd be showing her that this was normal, acceptable the way families work. I'd be programming her to accept her own victimization someday, teaching her that compliance is safety and resistance is futile. No, I said quietly. My daughter-in-law's eyes widened. What did you say? I said, no, I'm not signing anything, and I'm asking you to leave my house. You can't be serious. Do you understand what you're doing? The consequences of refusing? I understand perfectly. You want my house and my money, and you've been systematically manipulating me for months to get it, making me doubt myself, isolating me, convincing me I'm losing my mind so I'd hand over everything without a fight. But I'm not as far gone as you've been telling me I am, and I'm not signing. My son ended his call, walked over to stand beside his wife, the two of them forming a united front against me in my own living room. Mom, you're being irrational. We're trying to help you. No, you're trying to help yourselves. And I want you to leave, both of you, now. We're not going anywhere, not until this is resolved. Emma, get your coat. We're taking Grandma to the hospital for an evaluation. She's clearly having some kind of mental health crisis. Emma didn't move. She stayed frozen in the corner, the doll pressed against her chest, her eyes locked on mine with a question I could read clearly. What do I do? I gave her the smallest nod, a permission she understood instinctively. She stood up, walked past her parents to stand beside me, and took my hand. The gesture was small, meaningless in practical terms. A 6-year-old child couldn't physically stop two adults from doing anything, but the symbolism was everything. She was choosing sides, choosing me, choosing what was right over what was easy, and that choice gave me the courage to stand my ground. You're not taking me anywhere. This is my house, and I'm asking you to leave. If you refuse, I'll call the police and tell them you're trespassing and threatening me. The police? My daughter-in-law laughed, a harsh sound with sharp edges. Go ahead, call them. We'll tell them exactly what we told you. That you're an elderly woman with dementia, that you're paranoid and confused, that we're concerned family members trying to help. Who do you think they'll believe? Us or a confused old woman making wild accusations? She had a point. They were credible, successful, the picture of concerned family members. I was old, alone, with no evidence of anything except my own word against theirs. The police would likely side with them, might even help them transport me for involuntary psychiatric evaluation. I felt my brief flare of resistance starting to crumble under the weight of reality. But then Emma spoke, her small voice cutting through the tension like a bell. I recorded you. Everything you said, the doll recorded it. The room froze. My son and his wife turned slowly to look at their daughter, incomprehension and dawning horror fighting for dominance on their faces. Emma held up the pink plastic doll, her chin raised in defiance that looked too old for her small face. What are you talking about? My son asked, his voice careful and controlled, but I could hear the panic underneath. Grandma bought me a recording doll. She told me to press the button when you started talking about the papers. I recorded everything, about taking her house and selling it, and about forcing her if she didn't sign, and about calling the people to take her away. I have it all. My daughter-in-law lunged for the doll, but Emma was faster, dancing backward and holding it behind her back. You can't have it. It's mine, and I'm going to keep it. Emma, give that to me right now, my son demanded, his voice rising. You don't understand what you're doing. I understand that you're being mean to Grandma. I understand that you want to take her house and lock her up somewhere. I heard you say it. We were trying to help her, and you're too young to understand. Give me that doll. He advanced on his daughter, and I stepped between them, my arms spread to shield her, even though I knew I wasn't strong enough to physically stop him if he really tried to take it. But the gesture was enough to make him pause, to make him realize what he was doing, what he was about to become. A father physically intimidating his 6-year-old daughter to cover up his attempted theft from his own mother. Whatever else he'd become, he wasn't quite ready to cross that line, not yet. You need to leave, I said again, my voice stronger now. Both of you, before this gets any worse. "You're not keeping that recording," my daughter-in-law hissed. "It's illegal. You can't record someone without their consent. It won't be admissible in any court." "Maybe not, but I can send it to every member of our family, to all your friends and neighbors and colleagues. I can post it online. I can make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of people you are. Legal or not, it will destroy you." The threat hung in the air, and I watched them do the calculation, weighing their options. They could try to take the doll by force, but that would likely involve assaulting both an old woman and a child, something difficult to explain away even if they succeeded. They could call the police, but now the police would hear the recording and might start asking uncomfortable questions. They could try to destroy my credibility, but the recording was their own words, their own voices, their own admissions of intent. They'd trapped themselves and they knew it. "This isn't over," my son said finally, his voice cold and hard. "You've just made this so much harder than it had to be. When you fall, when you hurt yourself, when you end up in the hospital, don't come crying to us for help. We're done trying to save you from yourself." "Good, I don't need that kind of saving." They left in a fury of slammed doors and squealing tires, and the silence they left behind was both terrifying and liberating. I sank into my recliner, suddenly exhausted, my hands shaking so badly I had to tuck them under my legs to stop them. Emma climbed into my lap, something she was getting almost too big for, and we sat together in the quiet house, listening to the clock tick, and our hearts gradually slow to normal rhythm. "Did I do good, Grandma?" she asked in a small voice. "You did perfectly, sweetheart. You were so brave." "Are they going to come back?" "I don't know, maybe, probably. But we're ready for them now." I held her close. This childhood saved me, and I realized that having the recording wasn't enough. My son was right that it wasn't over. They'd regroup, come up with a new strategy, find another way to get what they wanted. The recording gave me a reprieve, but not a solution. I needed more than evidence of one conversation. I needed proof of a pattern, documentation of their manipulation, witnesses to their behavior. I needed to build a case strong enough that they couldn't dismiss it, couldn't explain it away, couldn't turn it around and use against me as evidence of my paranoia. And I needed to do it before they found a way to have me declared incompetent despite Emma's recording. I'd won a battle, but the war was far from over. That night, after Emma's parents picked her up in stiff silence, after the house fell quiet except for the familiar creaks and settling sounds that had comforted me for 47 years, I sat at my kitchen table with paper and pen and started making lists. Names of people who might help me, resources I could access, evidence I needed to gather. Every conversation with my son over the past months that I could remember, every subtle manipulation, every time they'd told me I was confused when I knew I wasn't. I wrote until my arthritic hands cramped, until my eyes blurred with exhaustion, until the first gray light of dawn started creeping through my kitchen window. And then I called someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year, someone I'd lost touch with after my husband died, because maintaining friendships took energy I didn't have, someone who'd been my husband's law partner, who'd retired around the same time my husband got sick, who might still remember the woman I used to be before grief and loneliness made me small. The phone rang 4 times before a sleepy voice answered. "Hello? Robert, it's me. I need help." 3 days later, I sat in a downtown office building, in a conference room that smelled like leather and old books, across from Robert and a younger lawyer named Sarah who specialized in elder law. I'd brought Emma's recording along with my own notes and documentation, and I'd told them everything about the papers my son wanted me to sign, about the threats and manipulation, about the plan to sell my house and lock me away. They'd listened without interrupting, taking notes, exchanging meaningful looks that I couldn't quite interpret. When I finished, Robert sat back in his chair and let out a long breath. "I knew your son when he was young," he said quietly. "Good kid, smart, ambitious. I never would have thought he'd do something like this. People change, or maybe they just show their true selves when money's involved. Money does things to people, especially when they feel entitled to it. How much equity do you have in the house?" "Around 300,000 after the mortgage, plus my savings, maybe another 100,000. and my social security, my pension from when I used to work. It's not a fortune, but it's enough to live on comfortably if I'm careful. It's enough to motivate certain people to cut corners on ethics, Sarah interjected, especially if they think they can justify it as being for your own good. I see this more often than I'd like. Adult children convincing themselves they're helping while really they're helping themselves to their parents' assets. The question is, what do you want to do about it? I want to make sure they can't do this to me. I want legal protections in place. I want my rights documented so clearly that no judge would ever give them guardianship or power of attorney. And I want to make sure that if something does happen to me, if I do decline cognitively, there are safeguards beyond just their word. Robert nodded. We can do that. First, we'll set up a living trust with an independent trustee, someone who isn't family, who'll manage your assets if you become incapacitated. We'll create an advance directive that specifies your wishes for medical care and end of life decisions, with someone other than your son as your healthcare proxy. We'll document your current cognitive state with an evaluation from a geriatric specialist, establishing a baseline that can be referenced if anyone tries to claim you're incompetent. And we'll file all of this with the court, creating a paper trail that shows you're taking control of your affairs while still fully capable. How much will all this cost? I don't have much to spare. Consider it pro bono. Your husband was my friend, and I owe it to his memory to make sure his widow is protected. I wanted to cry from relief, but I'd done enough crying over the past few days. Instead, I focused on the practical steps, on the actions I could take, on building the fortress around my life that my own family had tried to tear down. Over the next 2 weeks, I did everything Robert suggested. I underwent cognitive testing that proved I was sharp as ever, maybe a little forgetful, but well within normal range for my age. I met with financial advisors and set up trusts and protections. I named Robert as my healthcare proxy and a bank as my trustee. I created a paper trail so long and so well documented that any court would see clearly I'd been of sound mind when I made these decisions, that I'd actively chosen to exclude my son from control over my life and my assets. And I sent copies of everything to my son with a letter explaining what I'd done and why. The response was swift and ugly. He showed up at my door 3 days after receiving my letter, his face red with rage, his voice loud enough that my neighbors probably heard every word. He called me ungrateful, vindictive, senile. He said I was being manipulated by lawyers who wanted my money, that I'd been turned against my own family by people who didn't really care about me. He threatened legal action, promised he'd fight the trust, swore he'd prove I wasn't competent when I'd made these decisions. And then he said the thing that hurt most, the thing that cut deeper than all the rest. You're going to die alone, Mom. You're going to end up in some facility with strangers taking care of you, and we won't be there. Is that what you want? To spend your last years without family, without anyone who loves you, just to keep control of your precious money? I looked at my son, at this man I'd given birth to and raised and loved with everything I had, and I saw a stranger, not because he'd changed, but because I'd finally seen him clearly for the first time in years. The little boy in those photographs I'd buried in the garden was gone, and I'd been mourning someone who didn't exist anymore, trying to please someone who saw me only as an obstacle and an asset. If the only way to have you in my life is to give you control over it, then yes, I'd rather be alone. And you know what? I don't think I'll be alone. I have friends I can reconnect with, communities I can join, a granddaughter who loves me for who I am, and not what I can give her. You're the one who's going to have to live with what you tried to do, with the knowledge that you were willing to warehouse your own mother for convenience and profit. That's going to follow you longer than any money would. He left without another word, and I haven't seen him since. Emma comes to visit sometimes, dropped off by her other grandmother or by friends' parents who've been briefed on the situation and agree to help maintain our relationship. She's 8 now, old enough to understand more about what happened, old enough to know that sometimes families break and it's not always fixable. The doll sits on my mantle, a $3 piece of plastic that saved my life, my home, my freedom. I never played the recording back after that first day. I didn't need to. The threat of it was enough, and actually listening to my son's voice saying those things would have hurt more than I could bear. But I kept it, backed it up in multiple places, insurance against any future attempts to depict me as the crazy old woman making up stories about her concerned family. I'm 75 now, still living in my house on Maple Street, still managing my own life with the help of systems and safeguards I put in place to protect myself. Some days are harder than others. Some days I forget things, lose track of time, find myself confused about what day it is or why I walked into a room. But I have support systems now, people who check on me without trying to control me, services that help with the things I struggle with while respecting my autonomy. I'm not as alone as my son predicted I'd be. I've reconnected with old friends, made new ones through a senior center I started attending, built a life that doesn't depend on family members who see me as a burden. I still think about my son sometimes, wonder if he regrets what he tried to do or if he still believes he was justified. I wonder if he tells himself stories about the difficult, ungrateful mother who rejected his help, if he's rewritten history to make himself the victim and me the villain. I wonder if he lies awake at night, thinking about the recording his daughter made, about the evidence of his true character, preserved in plastic and circuitry. I hope he does. I hope it bothers him. I hope every time he looks at his daughter, he remembers that she saw him clearly and chose differently, that she valued integrity over inheritance, love over money, her grandmother over her parents' greed. Emma is my hope. She's proof that the cycle can break, that children can learn from their parents' mistakes instead of repeating them, that one generation's corruption doesn't have to infect the next. She visits when she can, brings me drawings and stories about school and all the small dramas of childhood that seem enormous when you're living them. She never mentions her parents, and I never ask. That door closed, and we've both made peace with walking through different ones. But the real lesson, the thing I learned too late but not too late to matter, is that accepting help isn't the same as surrendering control. That needing support doesn't mean giving up agency. That being old and sometimes forgetful doesn't make me incompetent or undeserving of dignity. For too long, I'd let my family convince me that dependence and independence were binary, that I had to choose between complete self sufficiency or complete surrender. The truth is messier and more nuanced. I need help sometimes. I accept that help from people I trust, people who respect my right to make my own decisions even when they disagree with them. I'm not the woman I was at 40 or 50 or even 65. My body is weaker, my mind occasionally fumbles for words or memories that used to come easily. But I'm still here, still myself, still capable of living a life that has meaning and purpose and dignity. And I'm still in my home on Maple Street, in the rooms where I raised my children and buried my husband, surrounded by memories and photographs and the accumulated weight of a life fully lived. My son wanted to take that from me, to erase the person I'd been and lock away the person I was becoming, to reduce me to a problem that could be solved with legal documents and institutional care. But he forgot that I was a person first, a woman who'd survived longer than he'd been alive, who'd weathered losses and hardships he couldn't imagine. He underestimated me because I was old, because I was his mother, because he'd bought into the narrative that elderly equals incompetent, and that underestimation was his fatal mistake. Because I may be old, but I'm not stupid. I may be forgetful, but I'm not senile. And I may have needed help. But I never needed a family who saw me as something to be managed rather than someone to be loved. The $3 doll still sits on my mantel, faded now from years of sunlight through the window, its plastic slightly cracked, its battery long dead. But I keep it there as a reminder that sometimes the smallest things save us, that children can be wiser than adults, that a toy can be a weapon when wielded with love and courage, and that family isn't always the people related to you by blood, but the ones who stand beside you when it matters most, who value your humanity over their inheritance, who see you as a person worthy of protection rather than an asset waiting to be claimed. I survived. My home is still mine. My life is still mine. And a 6-year-old girl with a recording doll and a fierce heart made sure I kept both. That's a debt I can never repay, but I'll spend however many years I have left trying to be worthy of the gift she gave me. the gift of being seen, being believed, being saved by someone small enough to hide a doll under her sweater and brave enough to press the button when it mattered most. Please hit that subscribe button now if you haven't already, and hit the notification bell so you always get notified when I post a new story, which I do every day. Leave a comment. Let me know what you thought of the story and where you are listening from. Thank you so much.